So without further ado, I'm going to turn today's presentation over to Barry Manning from the City of Portland and to introduce his team and get this presentation underway. Thank you. Barry, please.
Great. Thanks, David. Barry Manning, as David said, a senior planner here at the Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And we're happy to be here today to talk a little bit about the Montgomery Park to Hollywood project, actually focusing on the Montgomery Park area and the Northwest Plan and character statement, which we're hoping to share information about with you all and get some feedback on. But I'm joined today by staff that are working on the project. Cassie Ballou, who is an urban designer here at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and she'll be handling much of the presentation today. I'm also joined by Joan Fredrickson. I've done that twice in a row now, who is a city planner here at Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and is working on the project as well, and was recently the West Portland District Liaison and completed the West Portland Town Center plan. So kudos to Joan on that. And then I'm also joined by Ryan Singer, who is a principal planner here at Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and he is the manager of our comprehensive plan and urban design team, of which we are all part. So thanks again for having us here. And I think we can go ahead and launch in. Cassie, we've got a presentation. I'm going to do part of it. Cassie will do part of it. And then happy to answer questions you have and then hear your feedback on some topics we're sharing.
Okay. Go ahead and share. So good afternoon, everyone. As Barry said, I'm Cassie Ballou with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and we're really happy to be here today to talk to you all about the Montgomery Park to Hollywood Northwest Plan and character statements. So we're going to begin our agenda today by just introducing a bit why we're here, and then provide you all with an overview of the project plan, the character statement proposal, and then just touch a bit on where we are in the process with the project. So many of you may be familiar with this project already, since Barry and others have brought it before the panel in the class earlier on in our process, or the project process. And then for those less familiar, the project is set within an existing industrial center in Northwest Portland, and we're working to create a new mixed-use neighborhood. The crux of the conversation is really, how do we go from this industrial center to a new mixed-use neighborhood? And then, although we're giving an overview of the project plan today, our main goal is really to hear and gather feedback on the character statement itself. And we're really excited for the opportunity to hear feedback from this group, and we'll look forward to the discussion. And so after today's discussion, there will be other opportunities to provide comments. And Joan put our information in the chat, so please feel free to reach out, since we only have an hour today to present and discuss with you all. We're happy to answer questions after that. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Barry to talk more about the plan itself.
Great. Thanks, Cassie. So again, I'll be presenting a little bit of background on the plan itself and its origins from the Montgomery Park to Hollywood study and where we're heading with it before I hand it back over to Cassie and talk a little bit about that. I also want to emphasize, Cassie said we're creating a mixed-use neighborhood here. There's a little bit of a different kind of mixed-use neighborhood that we'll be creating, I think, here. One that includes a fair amount of employment as well as housing and other uses. So it's maybe keep that in mind as we're talking through this, that this is a bit of a different animal in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to achieve a balance of employment, housing, and the services that will support both residential and employment uses in this area. So a little bit background about the MP2H study. This got started back in 2019. It was a collaboration between BPS and PBOT, and it was funded by a Federal Transit Administration planning grant in partnership with Metro. And what it was doing was exploring potential future transit extensions to serve Montgomery Park. Can you mouse over for me, Cassie? Thanks. Since you're driving, Montgomery Park area in Northwest Portland, and the Hollywood Town Center or Hollywood District in Northeast Portland. So this really had two legs, and it was initially conceptualized as maybe a new line that would augment the rest of the system in terms of a transit connection. And we were set to look at how assess the opportunities on these routes, both in Northwest and Northeast, to understand what the opportunities for the transit investment was and what changes in land use could be made to support housing and development, or housing and job creation, rather. So on the east side, the study, which was really more of a preliminary assessment of the opportunities on these three alternative alignments, if you will, looked at Broadway Weidler connecting from the Lloyd District over to the Hollywood District. It looked at Sandy Boulevard connecting from the central east side out to Hollywood along Sandy. And then it also looked at the opportunities along a third alignment, which was from essentially the Lloyd Center Convention Center area along Northeast Irving out to Sandy and then connecting to Hollywood. And that preliminary study really looked at how much development opportunity there was for housing and job creation in each of those three alignments. We have a draft of that those findings online. So if anybody wants to check out the MP2H website, there's some information there to share. Each of those alignments had pros and cons in terms of housing. The Sandy alignment really had the highest potential for housing. The Lloyd alignment had the highest potential for jobs, and the Irving alignment actually had a potential, since it runs through the area between the Banfield and Sandy, for quite a bit of housing and jobs, but had its own particular challenges in terms of the way the alignment was configured. So the Northwest study area, we saw really the opportunity for maybe a nearer term transit investment and land use changes that could support new housing and jobs. In the Northwest alignment, the alignment and this is showing a slightly different alignment that we studied initially, landed near the Montgomery Park building, which is adjacent to the former ESCO Steel site, which is a currently vacant site with tremendous opportunity for development. And the question we were trying to answer is, how should that area evolve in the future? Next slide. So the area we're talking about is also part of our urban design framework. Cassie's outlining it there. It's just north of the Northwest Town Center. So as we move through this process, should code changes and the plan be adopted, we'll probably be expanding the Northwest Town Center to encompass this area, which lies north of Northwest Vaughn and south of Nicolai, west of Highway 30. Next. So we started off the MP2H process with a number of planning goals. These are probably very familiar to most of you, but supporting the 2035 comp plan, which was adopted and effective in 2018, climate action plan and climate emergency goals, really trying to make sure that we're creating a resilient neighborhood. We intended to focus, part of the goal was to focus growth, both housing, jobs, and services in centers and corridors. So expansion of that center would be part of that. Increase opportunities for housing and employment, improve access to housing, middle-wage jobs, and nature and recreation through these options. And I think importantly in this was advance equitable and sustainable outcomes by developing a community benefit strategy. So if we're going to investigate zoning changes in this area, which is largely zoned for heavier industrial and employment uses and does not currently allow housing, if we were considering rezoning that would offer a broader range of development outcomes, how can we create some benefits or public benefits that would help support that. And then finally, because this was part of an equitable development, transit-oriented development grant, we were aiming to ensure that underserved communities had an opportunity to participate in the project and have their voices heard. So next slide. So part of our community engagement, kind of building on that last, included work with 4 community-based organizations initially to do outreach to their communities that might be affected by potential changes in these areas. On the east side, we worked with the Hollywood Senior Center and Urban League that partnered on outreach. And MISO, which is Micro Enterprise Solutions of Oregon, as they represented folks, women and minority-owned businesses along many of those alignments that could be affected by potential investments in streetcar and changes in land use. On the west side, we worked with Friendly House, which is a neighborhood-based organization with ties to the community in Northwest Portland. And we also worked with the Northwest Industrial Business Association and Columbia Corridor Association as one of the groups on the west side, primarily because, as I said earlier, this area is largely industrial employment currently, and they have a stake and are key stakeholders in the area in terms of potential for change. We also work with other neighborhood groups, Northwest District Association, again, NEBA, Northwest Active Streets, Northwest Business Association, and several East Side neighborhoods when we did our initial outreach. We have done some public open houses and other feedback forums starting back in March of 2020 when we did the last live in-person workshop before COVID hit, and then everything went virtual after that, so we adapted. But we also did open houses on alternative scenarios in July 2020 and on a discussion draft that we released in late 2021. And we had another opportunity for comments through April of 2022. And I think many of you have participated in that process. And then most recently, we went back live and in person and had a design character workshop in June of 2023, which we're following on here with more feedback from you all. We, as part of the project in Northwest, because we anticipated more significant changes there, we formed a Northwest Project Working Group. We had 8 meetings with that group between 2020 and 2021, and that included members of the local neighborhood association and business association, as well as representatives from the community-based organizations and some property owner interests as well. It was not an advisory group, but it was a group that gave feedback to staff and acted as a sounding board to give us direction as we move through the project and through our proposals. And then most recently, I also want to mention that we've done some additional outreach to several community groups, including neighborhood-based groups, but also community groups that have an interest in African-American heritage in the area and want to celebrate York, who is a member of the Lewis and Clark Centennial Expedition, an enslaved member of that, for whom Northwest York Street in that district is named. They participated, and we've also had ongoing meetings with key property owners. Next. So what were our study area objectives? We were looking initially at this map here, shows the original study area. The alignment was to go up 18th and 19th and cross over into the area of Industrial District north of 405, out York and looping back on Wilson Street, all the way out to Montgomery Park and back. That alignment has evolved over the time, and you'll see that in the next few slides here. But we were, again, evaluating urban design and key development opportunities, with the ESCO site being a primary one, considering comprehensive plan and zoning changes where it made sense to do that, and then conducting transportation analysis and plan updates. PBOT was obviously working on those elements. And then we've also been working on an equitable development strategy that talks about public benefits that we're trying to achieve. Next. So why are we looking at this area closely? Again, there's an opportunity to increase housing, including affordable housing and jobs in this opportunity-rich and low-carbon neighborhood in Northwest Portland. Great connections to the rest of the city, close to the central city, close to shopping and other urban amenities in Northwest Portland. So it really is a key opportunity area. Montgomery Park had anticipated future development of housing and other uses on site. So they had a proposal or a master plan that they had developed that envisioned change on their site. And then the former ESCO site, which is adjacent directly east of Montgomery Park, has, as I said earlier, great development potential on this vacant site, and which is now largely vacant. You can see that in the larger of the 2 photos there. So it really begged the question about what should happen on that site. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that we went through several different scenarios. We explored scenarios for maintaining industrial and employment uses on this site, both east and west of Highway 30. We explored higher intensity office uses and employment uses in the areas both east and west of 30. We also explored with the community opportunities for mixed use development more broadly, both east and west of Highway 30. And at the end of that process, we landed on a concept that was a hybrid, really, of a employment, industrial, and mixed use scenario. So what this does is, and the diagram will show, it creates the proposal would be to create a new mixed use neighborhood in the area west of Highway 30, served by an extension of Portland Streetcar. So that's that red area, and it takes advantage of opportunities created by the ESCO site and opportunities on the Montgomery Park site, as well as some surrounding areas. It would change land use designations in that area from their current industrial and employment to mixed use to facilitate a broader array of land uses in that area. It creates the potential for over 2,000 housing units with 200 or more affordable units associated with that. That's through the inclusionary housing program and other options. Again, this area is an industrial area, and we want to continue to foster jobs in the area. So we're really looking at zoning that would facilitate employment and job opportunities in the area, and tools in our zoning code that might help do that. And then, because it's in the context of an industrial area, particularly to the north, we're creating an employment buffer along Northwest Nicolai, shown in blue there that Cassie's outlining, that would provide a transition between the new mixed-use area or area where housing opportunity would exist and the existing industrial areas to the north of Nicolai. So really trying to make that transition work as well as possible. And then finally, because of our industrial land supply needs and are interested in maintaining industrial jobs in the area where it makes sense to do so, we're retaining industrial zoning and limiting industrial land loss east of US 30. So in that gray area that Cassie is outlining. So the study area has really shrunk from that larger, much larger 18th, 19th alignment on both sides of Highway 30 to really focus mostly on the area west of Highway 30. And so what does this kind of a change mean? This is the type of development that could be allowed under the current zoning and land use regulations. You see on the Montgomery Park site, we've illustrated some, and if you could circle that, Cassie, some buildings that could be developed on that site. And this was based on their conceptual master planning work from a few years ago, because that site is currently zoned for mixed use development, EX, Central Employment Zone, and then showing the type of development that would be allowed currently on the ESCO, former ESCO site, and some of the adjacent industrial and employment zone sites here. So more typical lower density employment uses. And what the changes that we're planning to propose would facilitate is something more like this slide, which shows more intense mixed-use development, combination of housing and employment uses on that site in the range of 5 to 8 stories, generally speaking. And our idea is that we would try to mix and integrate both employment and housing into this area over time, so that we want to try to maintain jobs here, but also facilitate housing and commercial services. Next slide. So how would we do that? The discussion draft from 2021 proposed to change the comprehensive plan in the area shown with the red outline. So we would go from what is currently a mixed employment and industrial comprehensive plan designation to a EX, or Central Employment Comprehensive Plan designation, which would facilitate a broader array of uses in this area, similar to what would be allowed on Montgomery Park right now. And then our proposed draft, I should mention also, this buffer area to the north is currently comprehensive planned for mixed employment. So that would largely stay the same there. There's an area to the right of that, or to the east, that says TBD. Those areas at the time of the comprehensive plan, or the discussion draft rather, had not been decided, but we will be proposing some changes in those areas that probably complement both the mixed employment and the EX areas to the south. Didn't want to get ahead of ourselves by sharing that yet. But in the proposed draft that's coming up, we're likely to apply central employment zoning to that EX comp plan area, and Also, that EX zone comes with the design overlay zone, the D overlay, which is largely why we're here to talk to you today. We're going to be applying more urban design-oriented zoning in this area, and we want to get your feedback on how to facilitate that transition. And the next slide. Finally, as we're thinking about this area, we've started to conceptualize it as different sub areas within this relatively small planning area. And I just want to walk through them with you really quickly. Sub area 1 shown in blue is a area that has existing smaller sites with some developed employment and industrial uses, 1 and 2 story older industrial buildings. Area 2 is the area between Vaughn and shown in green between Northwest Wilson and Northwest Vaughn, which would be adjacent to a extension of the streetcar, and also on Vaughn provides a transition to the neighborhood, the existing Northwest neighborhood to the south. So we're thinking about how do we take that transition area and treat it effectively. Area 3 is largely the former ESCO site. It is mostly vacant right now, awaiting outcomes of this plan and future development opportunities. But really the question is, how should that area be treated in the future? Area 4 contains 2 major historic resources, the Montgomery Park building and the American Can site. And that probably won't be subject to some of the character statement that we're talking about today, but really needs to be thought of in conjunction with this area. And then area 5 is that employment buffer to the north. We expect to have continued employment and maybe more intensified employment uses in there that could include office, but that will stay as a non-housing zone. We won't be applying the design overlay zone to that. So the transition between the magenta and brown and blue areas to that yellow area is an area that we're also thinking about. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Cassie. Oh, before we go, so where are we at in the process? So this summer in 2023, we had briefings with several commissions, the Planning Commission, Design Commission, and Historic Landmarks Commission. Staff anticipates releasing a proposed draft in spring of 2024, and that would result in joint hearings with the Planning Commission and Design Commission sometime in spring 2024. We anticipate probably 2 work sessions with those groups. We'll see how that goes. And then ultimately, the Planning and Design Commissions will make recommendations to City Council, which we expect to take to them in summer of 2024. So with that, I'll hand it over to Cassie.
Thanks, Barry. All right, so we're going to switch gears here and talk a bit about the character statement proposal. And just as a refresher, I know many of you know what these tools are, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, I wanted to start by reminding us what they are, where they apply. So they apply in our centers and corridors, which have the design overlay, and just a repeat of the urban design framework map that Barry showed, showing those centers and corridors. The character statements are part of the citywide design guidelines that apply outside of our central city plan district. They are developed in partnership with local community, and it's really an opportunity for community to participate in the design process early on, and it's kind of updating this living document, which was the intention when the design guidelines were adopted. And then the character statements are adopted through a legislative process with a recommendation from the Design Commission to City Council. And that Barry kind of just went over where we are in that point of the process with this project. And so just to touch a bit more on the concept of the statements themselves, each one is limited to 2 pages, and each page is intended to have a specific focus. Page 1 is really about providing a background, which includes kind of the existing conditions, a brief history of the area, and local character as it relates to community architecture, urban design, nature. And then that background is supported by resources, a map, a diagrammatic map, and a community quote. Page 2 is where the kind of the beef or the bulk of the statement lives. It's the character sections, which provide guidance on how development should respond to distinct qualities of the area's context, and then again breaks it down into these 3 categories: community, architecture, urban design, and then natural and scenic resources. And these qualities, context, they're determined by our outreach with community. And the guidance isn't meant to be an exhaustive list of guidelines, but just offer a range of ways that development can address local context in order to meet citywide design guideline 1 in the general guideline document. I also want to note again that the guidelines and the character statement can't regulate building height, FAR, or use. So it's really about the public realm experience and the buildings, the exterior of the buildings themselves, and the connections between these spaces. So this is our current draft, and I just wanted to break it down and provide a little bit more specificity on the different parts briefly. And yeah, this is our current draft that many of you might have seen already. But just to touch on the diagram itself is really a quick visual reference to orient folks as they read the document. The background section, again, is just to provide context for current existing conditions. The quote is something we add just to give a hint of some of the community voices that we've heard through the process of creating this document. And on page 2, the character sections highlight the distinct qualities and ways development can address the context of this area. And then a photo for each section kind of highlights either specific context or a design approach that's mentioned in the guidance. And so just getting to the, going back to the project area itself, I wanted to review where the statement will actually apply in the project area, because it won't apply everywhere, as Barry kind of touched on earlier. We have developed a series of sub-areas, 5 sub-areas, each distinct in its urban form, block, lot patterns, its building typologies, and uses. And in the case of sub-area 4, we have the 2 landmarks. But only 4 of the sub-areas, as indicated by the purple hatch, will actually, the character statement will actually apply to only 4 of those sub-areas. Of those areas, sub-areas 1, 2, and 3 will most heavily use the character statement for projects that go through design review. It will also apply to a small portion of sub-area 4 outside those landmark boundaries. And although it won't apply in sub-area 5, as Barry mentioned, we're working on developing guidance for how development can help kind of buffer and mitigate impacts between the uses in sub-areas 3, 4, and the ones adjacent to that employment buffer. And then finally, the zoning in this crosshatch is again being determined for applying the D overlay. Were you going to add something? Yep. Okay. So just wanted to give a visual to the 2 landmarks. I know many of you are familiar with already, but the Montgomery Park complex, pretty prominent landmark, built in 1920, designated in 1985, and the American Can complex, built in 1921, designated in 96. And then both are on the site of the 1905 Lewis and Clark exposition, Centennial Exposition, the World's Fair. So both sites are pretty visible throughout the district, and we've heard quite a bit from community on how they want to see these reflected in the character statement and acknowledged in development, either through providing views of the resources, particularly Montgomery Park, or acknowledged through the use of materials or building details. Touching on some of the specific outreach efforts we've done for the character statement, Barry mentioned the design character workshop that we did back in June, which was also kind of an open house held at Friendly House. And it was really an opportunity to re-engage community on the project and on the statement after a pause. We had around 30 community members and a broad range of ages and backgrounds attend. Then most recently in October, we released a survey which closed in November. We're still going through all the responses for that, but we had about 73 respondents in total, which is pretty robust, and we got a lot of great feedback. And the direction, most of the feedback we got was supportive of the direction, but we have a lot of work to do by what we received in the comments that we've gotten back. So And then the last effort here, we're anticipating an additional design character BIPOC focus group effort in late January to get more robust feedback from communities of color on the character statement. That was something we've been planning internally, and then also got encouragement from the Landmarks Commission, Historical Landmarks Commission, during our briefing with them to continue on that work. And so the outreach we did in June, and the additional feedback we heard during the discussion draft really were the foundation that helped create the current draft of the character statement. I just want to walk through a few elements of the draft, starting with this diagrammatic map. And the feedback we received provided a lot of the content you see on this diagram, including the location of the Vaughn Street ballpark, this existing the existing rail tracks in sub areas 1 and 3. We heard a lot of talk about working to try and incorporate that, and encouraging development to incorporate that. And also this idea of a green curtain element along Northwest Vaughn. And the map is really intended, again, to highlight important destinations, features of historic context, and also provide some of the more land use context, like the Northwest Town Center down here and the Giles Lake Industrial District to the north. So trying to give a good amount of context in one small diagram. Next, the background section. We already kind of gave a general overview of what this is intended to do, but here we're really trying to highlight how the urban form of this area and the street patterns are really a result of the area's complicated past with the natural environment, industry, and even communities of color. Pictured on the left side here is what was formerly known as Giles Lake, which many of you may know was altered for the Lewis and Clark Exposition in 1905. And we had then it was filled in during the time after that, which led to a major industrial center. Later development moved in, such as Giles Lake Ports, to support manufacturing during World War II. And we also wanted to talk about or incorporate some of the most recent history where City Council decreed that York Street be in the area be named in honor of York, the enslaved man who played a crucial role in the Lewis and Clark expedition. And then finally, the background, I just want to touch on that the background also features a policy section, which is intended to highlight how current policies are hoping to leverage the area's proximity to the desirable amenities to create this diverse, low carbon, mixed use center that we've been describing. So now touching on the character statements or sections themselves, when writing these, our main goal was to really portray what we're hearing from community, what was special about this area according to community. And so this set up a few themes in each section. In the community character section, we wanted to really try and reflect the community's pride in its diverse mix of uses and think about ways development could respond reasonably to that. Also wanted to speak to the need to recognize the contribution of communities of color in this area, specifically the Black and Indigenous communities. And then also look at or just explore the desire for spaces to gather, commune, and recreate. We've heard a lot of desire for not only small courtyard spaces, but larger spaces that allow for recreation and gathering. The architecture and urban design section, we focused on a few key themes as well. Just going to point out a few. The desire or need to buffer from pollutants and noise along Highway 30 and Northwest Nicolai. So thinking about how development could do that. Also the desire to reflect the district's industrial heritage and then the character and diversity of buildings within the new developments. So how could that be supported? And then the need to mitigate urban heat island impacts in this area as new mixed-use development is moving in. And then finally, the natural and scenic resources section, there's a desire to really incorporate public views of Mount Hood, of the Fremont Bridge, of Montgomery Park. So thinking about how we could incorporate public views of these spaces or encourage the incorporation of public views. Also thinking about the desire to reference and provide a more direct connection or a hint of a direct connection to Forest Park with this green curtain concept that actually came from our community workshop in June. And then the need to preserve and plant more trees. We heard a lot of desire for a more verdant green district. And that also kind of connects to the issue in the architecture and urban design section about wanting to mitigate urban heat island impacts. Yeah. So we wanted to end with just touching on a few themes that we're hoping to hear feedback on from you all specifically. Of course, we're open to other subjects, but these are ones that we are really kind of struggling with on our own and would love to hear feedback on. So first is acknowledging the area's industrial heritage and character. And then kind of related, referencing Montgomery Park and the American Can Complex within developments. I'd love to hear thoughts, feedback on that. And then acknowledging Black and Indigenous community history in this area, thinking about what kind of design language or guidance would be helpful for that. The next one, referencing multicultural development within design guidance. We've heard both from the Design Commission and Historic Landmarks Commission a desire to incorporate language along those lines. And we're continually working on what that might be. Also addressing transitions between uses. You heard us talk a little bit about specifically that transition between the employment buffer and the sub areas below it, thinking about what that could entail. And then finally, because we're looking at basically the creation of new streets here, thinking about supporting Portland's connectivity and pedestrian goals in the area as new development moves in, and we have an opportunity to meet those goals and support that. So with that, I'm going to end the presentation, and I'll stop sharing for now. We can always
Barry muted. There we go.
Yes.
Mhm.
So that's where we're at with the project right now, and we're looking to get your feedback and take your questions. So I think we've answered a couple of them here. There was a question about the streetcar alignment proposal, and I neglected to mention that. I should have emphasized that. The proposal right now would be an extension up 23rd Avenue and then heading north of Vaughn and then heading west on Roosevelt Street and then looping back on Wilson Street back into the system.
Hey, Barry, this is Bob. It would be helpful if you had one of the site plans or one of the documents up so we have it as a reference.
Okay, sounds good. I think Cassie can bring that up.
Yep.
Plus your camera's off, Barry, so we'd love to see your smiling face.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
There we go.
I saw another question here. Are we exploring crossing improvements for Vaughn? Yeah. PBOT has developed a transportation plan, a draft plan. It's posted online. There are some crossing improvements. I think some of them are already in the works on 24th, pardon me?
As part of Northwest in Motion.
As part of Northwest in Motion. There aren't a tremendous amount of crossing there that aren't already established there. I believe there's a signalized crossing at is it 27th right now, and then there's another one at 25th right now. We're thinking that those are probably areas that we might emphasize, in terms of getting pedestrians across the street safely. I think 24th is proposed to be a pretty significant bike crossing.
Mm-hmm.
I got to look at the chat here again.
I would just add to that very quickly, Barry, and having lived in that area, of course, like the 23rd turnbuckle there with every different vehicular potential you can think of happening. I'm always wondered, have folks been trying to tame that, in some way so that crossing makes more sense when you're on foot.
Yeah, and I'm going to be a little bit hesitant to speak to it in a lot of detail. PBOT we probably should have brought them in tow with this, but we're focused mostly on the character statement today. But they do have some traffic control options at that intersection of 23rd to help minimize conflicts to the degree possible and to also mitigate traffic impacts.
And I would add, and there's a further question about the sort of Northwest Vaughn being a, sort of a stark barrier. And I think that I think we, in our discussions, we've agreed with that, and looked at ways to, sort of soften that. Both, it's like you can make it more welcoming just by having two sides of sort of uses that are more friendly. And then also through our thinking on the urban design and Cassie, I think that we had looked at this as the sort of green screen, like we wanted to put trees, right? Is that the
Right.
treatment here? Yeah.
Yeah. Transitioning Vaughn from the steel curtain, which it was described before, to a green curtain that would help ease that transition.
Yeah.
So this is Brian Campbell, one of the executive committee members. I think you're asking actually not necessarily for in addition to questions to actually have comments on your character statement. So I'm curious about, does anybody have any reactions to that, to the wording that's there, to the actual statements itself. So I'm curious about that. We have 50 plus people on here. We should be able to have some kind of reaction.
Thanks so much, Sharon.
Would it be helpful if we shared some more of the character statement with you, Brian, or?
Well, I think that you're asking the question, I think, about that.
There was like 4 or 5 points that you made right there at the end,
Yeah.
Brian, there that at the end of your slide deck that were kind of pointing us in that direction. I can jump in quickly and sort of attempt to break the ice here in that, interestingly enough, there's this discussion about the historic landmarks, the fact that they were designated back in the 80s, the American Can and Montgomery Park sort of stand alone. It seems like the feedback question is pretty open-ended, referencing Montgomery Park and American Can Complex. Is there any strong, I mean, I would say that should be looked at as both historical reference, but also looking for a great deal of contrast as a way of kind of complementing their existing position. We're not looking to establish it like a historic district or something along those lines. I don't think, but I'm curious what you think or others in the room think.
You mean us? David?
The team that's currently working on it, that statement right there is pretty open-ended. Maybe you could give a little insight beyond that.
And I did that purposefully because I didn't want to directly answer, but we've gotten a lot of feedback, both on referencing the buildings themselves in terms of, if the Historic Landmarks Commission, for example, talked about the window detailing or the window types and the depths, the materials used on the buildings.
And reflecting that in some new development.
And reflecting that.
But I'm hearing some different conversation maybe happening here as well.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And then also the views of the buildings have also come up quite a bit and how to reference them.
Hey, Barry, I have a question. You mentioned PBOT, your colleagues at PBOT, and how they are, I don't know if they're involved in this, but at least from our experience from UDP, PBOT has, I hope no one's on PBOT from listening, but they come in at certain times, maybe earlier or later, but not at the appropriate time. So I just want to make sure that you said they're not involved now, but eventually they're going to be incorporated and their thoughts are in this. So it's not changes are done at the last minute. No,
they've been consistently involved since the very beginning in this project. It's really a partnership. We're working with them very closely. They are, working on, we came up with the concept for the area and the alignment kind of jointly based on, some of the land use opportunities and challenges that we were finding in the area, and our desire to limit changes to the industrial land supply where it made sense to limit those, and exercise opportunities where there was an opportunity to be looked at. So the alignment moved. So that was all done in concert with PBOT, and they are continuing to, along with Portland Streetcar, refine the way the rights of way would look, and the design of the entire streetcar system, as well as the streets. The one thing that I'd note about this is that our current thinking about street pattern is that in the blocks between essentially Vaughn and Roosevelt, we're maintaining and building. We're proposing to build on the existing pattern that's there, which is kind of a 200 by 460 block pattern. So the larger double blocks, but still a very traditional Portland block pattern. North of Roosevelt, it's a little bit less defined how the direction of that area that is currently the former ESCO site would take, although we know that there are connectivity requirements and needs in that area. So there's a desire to connect 25th through that area to create some kind of a connection there, and a desire to have a east-west connection either along York or something else that would come in that area. But some of the definition of that is still, to be determined in the future. So, but we are working very closely with PBOT on that. And they do have a direct transportation plan that's on both our website and their website. The rights of way, by the way, for the area, in the Vaughn and Wilson corridor, assumed to be in the 60 to 66 foot range, basically. So not big streets, relatively small urban streets, with bike facilities, a streetcar, a travel lane that includes a streetcar, and fairly robust sidewalks and furnishing zones.
Barry, Carol has a question in the chat there regarding existing trees.
Yeah, there is a really nice treed slope area north of Montgomery Park leading down to the existing facilities. I think it's Kaiser that's the tenant in that area still. And, we haven't identified that as a preservation opportunity, although that's been talked about a lot, and maybe that's something we could pursue a little bit more. We have talked about extending that notion of a treed transition between the mixed use areas to the south and the employment area in that buffer area to the north. We're still debating whether or not that makes the most sense, or whether some other techniques or transitions might work for those areas. So we'd be happy to hear more feedback on that too.
I'm not seeing a lot of people jumping in, but I'm going to circle back to this question of the historic landmarks, American Can and Montgomery Park. And I would just finish with the thought, I appreciate the references of people talking about the windows, basic proportions and maybe volume of the buildings that are there. But I would offer that the industrial heritage of the area really should promote the opportunity for freedom in architectural design, and articulation, whether that be with the urban spaces between, but especially with the buildings themselves, that we're not looking to kind of create a historic industrial district, but rather that could be kind of freeing relative to some of the more traditional residential referential neighborhoods just to the west of us. So this industrial zone reconversion into mixed use with a couple landmarks there, but really contrast or riffing off of their existing sort of architectural precedent, but with the greatest freedom possible in the zone, would be a great sort of, I don't want to say contrast, but new opportunity in the general sort of Northwest residential and mixed use space for design. Thanks.
So Barry, Carol had a question in the chat, and Patty has his hand up too, so you might
See the chat.
address the.
Yeah, I see two questions. One from Fiona. She was curious if
I'm sorry, Fiona's the one I was not gonna. Yeah.
does the historic resource boundary at Montgomery Park cover the building or the full property, including parking lot? I think it's a little bit less than everything, but more than the building. And
Yeah.
Cassie will put that up there.
Yeah, so it's the building and the parking lot, a little bit of everything.
And Carol had a question: is Portland Parks and Recreation involved in this planning effort? So that's a great question and one that deserves a mention. One of the things that we're aiming to achieve in this is to try to create some form of green or open space that would serve a park-like function, given the nature of the change in the area and the amount of housing that we anticipate could be built in this area. Parks and recreation are tangentially involved, not directly involved. We are working with them as we try to pull together a package of public benefits that we are working with in concert with not only our through our zoning code, but also working with some of the larger property owners on opportunities to create such a space. So we're still working through that, and hopefully we'll have something by the time the proposed draft is published in early spring that gives more guidance on that. One of the things we are requiring in new residential development in this area, which is related to the existing mixed use zones, is requiring on-site outdoor areas or open areas. And so we expect to have some greening of the district and some opportunity for open area, but we have an aspiration for a collective space, but haven't landed that yet.
Patty, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you. A couple of years ago, we had a presentation to the Urban Design Panel on the Montgomery Park master plan itself that Flato did.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that was talked about a great deal at that time was finally establishing a formal entrance to Forest Park. And somehow this is going to be the grand entrance to it. And it seems that extending streetcar up here suddenly makes that even more of an opportunity. I wonder if any further thought had been given to that.
I believe that, and I'll just try to take a response to that. I believe that Montgomery Park, at least the current ownership, was very interested in trying to facilitate that. This plan, it's probably beyond the details that this plan can get at this point in time, but I think that that's still an aspiration to get to create more of a link to Forest Park from this area, and the streetcar itself would provide an opportunity to bring people to the area and link those two areas. But we have not done a lot more detailed planning on that effort.
I'll add that green curtain concept that keeps being referenced was a way to try and create a more direct connection to Forest Park, even though outside the project boundary, which is, over here, we don't have a lot of control, but that is one way we're trying to reference or strengthen that connection too.
Well, we don't seem to have any more questions in the chat. Nobody's hands are up that I can tell. So, David, do we want to wrap this up or?
Yeah, I mean, we're all going to sort of run out of time at 1 o'clock anyway, but it doesn't seem to be a real robust response. I have a couple quick things to say on the wrap up. Barry, thank you so much. Cassie, everybody on your team. I would have liked to have seen more people sort of react, but now that we've had it put out in front of us, that's important. Please understand that the executive committee for the urban design panel makes itself available for just this reason as well, in parallel with the present panel presentations. If we can squeeze it into we can try to provide input, and we would sort of canvas around amongst our different professions to sort of drive a response, Barry. So we could circle back together and discuss with our executive committee, maybe giving you some value, effectively a white paper on a response from the urban design panel, if you'd like to do that. So let's hold that, and we can email to see if we want to go forward with that. We're capturing anybody and everybody's input here today and archiving it, so we'll always have that. I don't think there's much more beyond what we've seen, but we're always open to discussions throughout all of our professional organizations. Patty Tillett reminded me before this meeting that we wanted to make sure that you all knew that we were tracking the AIA DAT, or Design Assistance Team for downtown Central Portland. There's going to be an update coming out on that in January for the effectively the restart. And we're going to be looking for steering committees. We've already got a rough idea of that, and we're going to be working with Heather Wilson out of AIA Oregon, starting again, and we'll keep the updates going in January. So then also be aware that next January we have our panel set for the Birdside Bridge replacement. And in fact, we're going to host the design team that's been selected out of the UK. Here, they're going to be here in Portland, and we are going to host them either through the Zoom meeting third Tuesday of the month, or we may have a shot at an in-person presentation. We're working our way back towards that. We can keep people posted through the AIA when that comes around. So Barry, I just wanted to give you a moment there for any final thoughts representing your team, and then we're going to sign off for this month.
Again, we thank you for having us here and giving us the opportunity to present. I speak on behalf of the team. We would, if you have individual comments, our emails are attached in the chat. Welcome to email us, and I think Cassie would welcome additional feedback. So if you've got something that is occurring to you about either the character statement or the plan itself and the directions that it's heading in, feel free to email us. And David will look at maybe circling back with the executive committee and seeing if there's some more feedback that we might be able to get that way. So we do appreciate people's interest in this and listening in today. And again, we'll welcome additional feedback. So
terrific. We'll talk to you soon, Barry. Thanks so much for your presentation and all your great work. Yep, we certainly will appreciate it.
Yeah, great.
Take care, UDP. See you next month.
Yep.
Thank you.